Brian Stelter's very upset, which is another sign we are winning. The right side is winning. Brian Stelter, quote, Meta's framing in its PR blog post is more speech and fewer mistakes. An alternate title could be more lies and more confusion. That's probably not it. And then there's the New York Times headline that everybody mocked yesterday on X. Yeah. Meta says fact checkers were the problem. Fact checkers ruled that false.
Ruled. That's the great answer. I wrote, I think, my first long piece about how the fact-checking industry, which deserves scare quotes, was not all that. It was more than a dozen years ago or so for Reason, because of the way that it was being applied so lopsidedly in the Obama era, right? You had PolitiFact giving lie of the year about Obamacare. Okay, that makes sense, except it was about Sarah Palin making a Facebook post about death panels. It wasn't about whether you could keep your doctor. It wasn't about whether, you've taken on the drug lobby and finally won, or many of the other things that Obama wasn't
about. Did you see their lie of the year this year, Matt?
Yeah.
It was not Joe Biden's, the best
yes, exactly.
Joe Biden, or
it was
Hunter,
cats and dogs.
Pardon, Hunter.
It's
it was
the
they're
cats
eating
and dogs.
the dogs.
Yeah. That's like, even take out the politics of this. Even take out it's obvious that you're more upset about Republican and MAGA Republican in particular rhetoric than you are about Democratic. Take that out. Actually look at the difference between, and this was true 12 years ago, is true today. They want to fact check political rhetoric. They don't want to fact check the lies that government are telling you in the name of making bad policy. How many, this goes hand in hand. We've had this crackdown on quote unquote misinformation hand in hand with the government serially lying to us about policies relating especially to COVID. And Michael's right to point to that. That's an interesting thing. Why are we actually using government pressure, I would say in violation of the First Amendment? It's being sort of adjudicated as we speak. But government pressure about this at the same time that the government is making brand new kind of bold stakes of its own misinformation. I would say that those two things go hand in hand. And journalism made a really bad departure 10 years ago or so, where it decided to be the referee of rhetoric as opposed to covering policy. Policy matters much more. And Democratic policy in Democratic places has produced really bad results. Republican policy sometimes does as well, but you should actually follow the way that works. And they don't. They are more naturally inclined to be upset with Sarah Palin's rhetoric than what would actually Barack Obama did when passing and implementing Obamacare. And this goes on and on and on. The biggest lie of a really long time was Biden's age. That is not lie of the year, is fundamentally enraging to at least half of the country.
It is a lie itself. We'll find out what the people of Greenland think. Charles C.W. Cook writes it up as follows, and I love this. This is it. For more than a decade now, many people within both social media and legacy media, in quotes, have attempted to use their power to end debate on a host of important democratic issues. This has failed, and spectacularly so. Even if one regards Zuckerberg's shift as a purely cynical surrender performed by a malleable and amoral cipher, one ought to be pleased at the impetus that provoked it. Something is changing out there, and changing for the better. Right on. And I know, Matt, you just wrote an article on Charlie Hebdo. It's amazing that we're at the 10-year anniversary of that massacre, which was about free speech. And whether, as that magazine did, you can depict the so-called Prophet Muhammad, or you will be murdered. And some segment of the population will say, yeah, right, you were offensive, right? We kind of touched on this a little bit earlier this week when I was going off on the movie Conclave, because it makes a total mockery of Catholicism and the cardinals and the Pope by, spoiler alert, they make the new Pope intersex. Okay, right? I think the LA Fire Department would be thrilled. But in any event, I was saying they would never do that to Islam or Muslims or even potentially Jewish people. But the Catholics, Christians, total fair game. In any event, the free speech debate has been raging for the better part of 10 years. And that Charlie Hebdo moment was one of the most important parts. And we looked like we were losing, but we're not.
Well, I think we are winning in the culture, and you're right to point that out. But we are not going to. We're not going to find a lot of winning within the kind of legacy cultural institutions. Even yesterday, I was just doing a last quick little Google News search before I hit publish on a piece about Charlie Hebdo, and here's the Columbia Journalism Review, right? Institutional kind of organ of the media industry talking to itself, talking about the mixed legacy and the free speech. It's more complicated and nuanced than all of that. And like we're talking about the murder of 12 people, beloved cartoonists who mocked first and mostly actually the Pope and every single French leader. I mean, they're an anti-clerical satirical weekly stretching way back, very anti-authoritarian. There isn't the mixed record here is only the performance of the media, which made Charlie Hebdo lonely, and it shouldn't have been. And this is something that Michael and I in particular have talked about and written about many times, not just over the last 10 years, but over the last 35, since the fatwa was placed on Salman Rushdie for Satanic Verses. There was a moment there where there was a time for choosing among Western intellectuals, and they chose badly. They chose intersectionally. They said, well, Rushdie, and Jimmy Carter's words in an op-ed that he wrote for the New York Times just 3 weeks after the fatwa, Rushdie is guilty of insulting Islam, because people from Muslim countries are more oppressed than Catholics or than people from a majority opinion. This was like a new introduction of cowardice on the part of the West, kind of judging it in this way. And when the Danish cartoon crisis happened in 2006, which Danish newspapers published cartoons of Muhammad, no one cared. And then a bunch of imams in the Middle East started publicizing them months later. And then it led to a bunch of riots. That was the moment when the West writ large should have reprinted those cartoons. I advocated for such when I worked for the LA Times very strenuously, and I lost very narrowly in the opinion section. And I feel shame to this day that I didn't win that argument because Charlie Hebdo was one of the only places that did that. And once you become an outlier, then you become a target. And they became an outlier because of the cowardice of the West, and not just about reprinting cartoons, about, in the case of the New York Times at one point, writing a file story about a statue of Muhammad that appeared on top of a New York courthouse for a half a century that no one cared about. They wrote an article about this in the wake of one of the Charlie Hebdo controversies and didn't even run a file photo of the statue that existed.
Oh, my Lord.
The historical
photo. But you
photo,
can make the Pope intersex. The male Pope can have lady reproductive parts, and it wins awards at the Golden Globes and elsewhere. Right. But what color? What color? That's the real question. You mentioned Matt Taibbi. He's got a Substack called Racket. He just posted this in response to Zuckerberg, saying in his video yesterday, he cited press pressure as part of the reason for proposed changes. After Trump first got elected in 2016, the legacy media wrote nonstop about how misinformation was a threat to democracy. Meta tried to address such concerns without becoming the arbiters of truth. Okay, that's not true. One would think legacy media, writes Taibbi, outlets covering Zuckerberg's video address might mention this. In other words, that it was their pressure that led him to implement these bad changes years ago in the first place. No luck, writes Matt. Neither the Washington Post nor the New York Times mentioned the legacy media comments by Zuckerberg. Both papers' readers, in other words, were served a curated version of reality that snipped out uncomfortable details. And God, do they wish the whole world could be like that. Yeah, as usual. Well said by Matt. You know how much my family and I love our dogs. Yes, even Strudwick. He was so sweet on our vacation. I can't imagine life without them. These guys have a great life, but some dogs are not so lucky. And this is why I'm so glad to tell you about Delta Rescue, the largest no-kill, care-for-life animal sanctuary in the world. They have rescued thousands of dogs, plus cats and horses too. They provide all the animals with shelter and safety, and most of all, with love. And they've been doing it for more than 45 years now. Delta Rescue relies solely on contributions, and giving can bring tax benefits to you too. Speak with your estate planner about how you can grow your estate while helping animals in need. And check out the estate planning tab on their website to learn more. We love our Thunder and Strudwick, but would like for other dogs who need love to find it too. Visit deltarescue.org today to learn more. That's deltarescue.org. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.